and Eastern medicine. If you have an appendicitis, you better hope that you're near a Western hospital with a Western-trained surgeon. You don't want to see your acupuncturist. I mean, maybe there are some things that Eastern medicine is better for, but generally speaking, Western medicine is the only medicine we have. And incidentally, if you do get an appendicitis, you might consider this idea that you've been intelligently designed. If ever there were a reductio ad absurdum of intelligent design, it's the appendix. So in the West, we've had an impoverished conception of sanity, really. We've had an impoverished conception of mental health. We think that, if you're walking down the street talking to yourself too much, and we all do it a little, but if you're doing it too much and not censoring yourself in front of other people, you're crazy. But if you talk to yourself all day long, silently, if you just know enough to shut up about it, but you're talking to yourself, thinking, from the moment you get out of bed to the moment you fall asleep, that's perfectly normal. That's compatible with perfect sanity. That is not the Eastern, and especially it is not the Buddhist view. I mean, in Eastern schools of meditation, they have discovered that there is an alternative to being lost in thought, moment by moment. In the West, the testimony on this subject is really thin. I mean, in the West, we have been standing on the shoulders of dwarves in contemplative terms. So I just want to briefly sketch for you what I think our contemplative traditions attest to. And this is something that is actually getting a lot of scientific interest at this point. As you probably know, there are meetings between the Dalai Lama and Western neuroscientists. I just came from one in DC, and this was devoted specifically to the clinical applications of meditation. But there is dialogue between Western scientists generally and contemplatives about how first-person data, first-person experience can be brought into the charm circle of third-person experiment, and how we can use this to understand the possibilities of human well-being a little bit better. So briefly, the first fruit of this dialogue really is the insight that positive human emotions, positive human traits, are skills. They are trainable. I mean, just as you can learn to play the piano, you can learn to feel compassion for somebody when you otherwise wouldn't. You can learn to feel joy at the success of another person rather than envy. And you can learn this because our brains are really plastic. Our brains are instruments that change based on how they are played. It's really quite magical that this is so, but it certainly seems to be so. Who knows to what degree our experience can change the brain and therefore change the possibilities of future experience. But we know that it does. And therefore, what you think matters. What you feel matters. How the kinds of intentions you form toward other people matters. Whether you act ethically matters. And what you pay attention to moment to moment, what you notice matters. And it even just matters for health. We know that stress is so corrosive of physical health now. We know that even if meditation did nothing other than reduce stress, it would be worth looking into. And we know that the brain is intimately linked with obviously the autonomic nervous system, but the endocrine system, the immune system. These systems are affected by your conscious emotional life and in turn affect the brain, its physical structure. But there's a deeper message from our contemplative traditions beyond that we can change our minds. The message is that there's something beyond the search for pleasure and pain. There's something beyond joy and sorrow and just the vicissitudes of human experience. And what is beyond is not some distant paradise. And what is beyond is not some distant paradise. It is simply consciousness itself. There's this insight that consciousness, that very thing that is aware of your experience in this moment, the very thing that is hearing the sound of my voice, that is feeling the sensation of your body sitting there, that transcends its content in some basic sense. That which is aware of joy, for instance, and that which is aware of sorrow is not actually improved by joy or diminished by sorrow. And what meditation is a way of just turning consciousness upon itself to try to glimpse this fact and to glimpse the way it feels. Because it doesn't feel like a self. It doesn't feel like I. We all walk around feeling like we are the thinker of our thoughts and the experiencer of our experience. We feel like we are having experience. We're not merely identical to our experience. And this point of view is really vulnerable to inquiry. I mean, if this seems just impossibly abstract, by analogy, I just want to point out to you, maybe I can tie it down to something that we all know is so. We all know we have an optic blind spot. We all know that the optic nerve passes through the retina, and so there's a point in our visual fields where we're not getting any information. We've all probably had this demonstration done in class where you do a mark on a piece of paper and you play with it and you get the mark to disappear. Now, so it is true of you now. There's, as you look out across the room, there's somebody very likely missing a head, and you're not noticing it. I mean, it's falling in your blind spot. It is possible to be made to notice this. Most people don't notice it. Even those of us who know about it go for decades without noticing it. And yet it is there, available to be noticed. There is an analogous insight into the nature of consciousness that is just as on the surface as that. It tends to be harder to notice. I mean, it requires most people some training in meditation to notice it. But it is possible to notice that consciousness, that in you which is aware of your experience, does not feel like I. And there's a wealth of testimony on how this can change a person's experience of the world for the better. I mean, there's a kind of mystical well-being that is compatible with going into a cave for a year. I mean, going into a cave, for most of us, going into a cave for a year is synonymous with everything we don't want to happen to us. It separates us from everything we want out of life. It's rather interesting to point out that solitary confinement is considered a punishment even in a prison. And yet you have contemplatives who are willing and made really quite happy by running this experiment on themselves, going into a cave for vast amounts of time and practicing meditation. My argument to you is we have to bring this end of the human this end of the spectrum of human experience into the data of our worldview. We have to understand the possibilities of the plasticity of human experience. And our conception of human well-being has to include this. So in conclusion, I want to say that what we really need is a contemplative science. We need a way of talking about human well-being and the possibilities of human happiness that is as totally unconstrained by dogma as science is. We need to find a way of talking about the reality of death. The fact that we are all going to die is an astonishing situation. If you can just hold on long enough, you are going to witness the death of everyone you love. And this is everyone's experience. No one is going to escape this. If it is possible to be happy in this condition, if it is possible to be deeply happy in this condition, we need to understand this in terms that don't rely on divisive superstitions. If there's an important role for ritual in our lives, if we need to mark those occasions in every human life, birth and weddings and deaths, with profundity, if this is actually doing some serious work for us, we need to understand this in rational terms. We need to develop language that is not first century superstition. So one way to summarize what I've said to you is that I'm really arguing that every one of us is a scientist, in that every one of us is making a claim about the way the world is. Every one of us wants to understand reality. None of us want to be confused. None of us want to be mistaken about the situation we're in. But there are areas of intellectual honesty in our culture where science is good, and there are areas where we have a fundamental double standard, where certainty has been unlinked from evidence. But just as everyone is a scientist, everyone is also a mystic, in the sense that every one of us has been born into a circumstance where we are helplessly seeking happiness in a condition where experience is always changing. What you get, you lose. And we are all interested, whether we have time to think about it or not, we are all interested in finding just how happy, how much well-being can be enjoyed in this circumstance, and in designing a civilization that can promote it. So I'm just asking you to imagine what it would be like to have a society where our conversation about human well-being could proceed totally unconstrained by dogma, where really we could bring the full measure of our creativity to bear on questions of human happiness. And my argument is that to get there, to get from here to there, the end game for civilization is not mere tolerance of other people's irrationality. It is not political correctness. It is reason. Thank you very much.